All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Actionable Outcomes Through Data. My name is Ellie Butler, and I am Head of Marketing for North America. I'm coming to you live today from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I know we have folks joining us from across North America. So welcome, and thank you for being here with us. We are thrilled to welcome today's panelists for a lively and engaging discussion centered around how institutions are using data to action and implement real change. Data is an essential element of a successful international enrollment management strategy, and it can be used to inform your recruitment, marketing, admissions, and conversion activities, and it can help you decide what markets to invest in. So today we'll be speaking with two institutions who are at the forefront of data-informed strategies so we can better understand how they maximize their outcomes using data. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be shared with you in a follow-up email. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A tool located at the bottom of this webinar window, and we will cover those questions at the end of the session. So I'll quickly touch on our agenda for this session. If we could jump back one slide. We will first introduce you to our panelists and their institutions. We'll then do a brief overview of IDP for those of you who may not know us, and then we'll jump into our panel discussion with our experts. So now we'll jump over to our speaker slide. I've already introduced myself, but I am joined today by my brilliant colleague, Prem Moda, who is Associate Head of Partnerships Special Projects at IDP. And I will allow our fantastic institutional panelists to introduce themselves and to give a brief overview of their institutions as well. So Erin, we'll start with you.
Great, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Erin White. I'm the director of MacEwan International at MacEwan University. MacEwan is located in Edmonton, which is in the province of Alberta. We're one of Canada's most northern major cities, so it's not the hottest selling place to sell for international education, but the students who choose us love us. So we're a comprehensive undergraduate university. We're not incredibly large. We have about 18,000 students, and about 5.5% of those students are international. We grew out of Canada's college systems, so we are also a bit unique as a university in that we still offer certificates and diplomas and bachelor degrees, but no masters. And so some of this has, as we'll learn a little bit later, presented some challenges that data has helped us through. We're a teaching institution primarily, but we've built in strong programs for students to gain research experience at the undergraduate level. And from our college roots, we focus on work integrated learning experience. We have those in more than 80% of our programs. For makeup, we have a strategic vision goal to get to 10% of our student population by 2030. Sorry about the grandfather clock. And in terms of our international student makeup, we have students from over 75 countries. Our top source markets are India, Nigeria, Vietnam, the Philippines, and China. And we made a decision about 8 years ago to diversify our markets. That really resulted in a major hit overall to our numbers. It was expensive to invest in broader markets, but we're starting to see that pay off sort of in both volume and where our students are coming from. So, and a lot of that was driven by data we had. So thanks.
Incredible. Looking forward to hearing more about that. Thank you, Erin. And over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Ellie. Patrick Sullivan, AVP International at SAIT, which stands for Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. SAIT is a publicly funded institute of technology based in Calgary, so just south of Erin, 3 hours. And for our US colleagues, we're basically north of Montana, just at the edge of the Rocky Mountains. SAIT is Alberta's third largest post-secondary institution. We offer about 110 programs in certificates, diplomas, degrees, post-diploma certificates across 8 industrial sectors, ranging from energy, digital technology, aviation, business, et cetera, et cetera. We have about 20,000 students at SAIT. About 13,000 are domestic and over 7,000 are international. We're one of Canada's top 50 college research institutions, been on the top 10 for the last 3 years. We do applied research in the college and institute sector in Canada. And because of our strong industry alignment, we have very strong employment rates. Students on average become employed after graduation. It's about 89 to 93% within 9 months of graduation. Yeah, so look forward to the conversation today.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. And very interesting about the labor market ties. Looking forward to discussing that further. And at this time, I will hand it over to Prem, who will cover a brief overview of IDP.
Great. Thanks, Ellie and Aaron and Patrick for joining in the session, and welcome everybody. So on the next slide, we just wanted to share a little bit on IDP as a company. For those of you who may not be very familiar with us, we are a student-first organization. So we employ 2,200 education counselors globally. They're all on an idp.com email address. We like to say it's 1 degree of separation. And our counselors are commission blind. So they're not looking at, if I place X student at this institution, I'll get X amount of tuition, commission. That really doesn't come into the equation when they're working with students. They really want to make sure that the student is at the right fit in terms of the program, the institution, and also location as well. We have an unmatched global scale. We operate 35 source markets. We have over 200 offices. In the financial year that just ended in 2023, we opened up an additional 46 offices, and we place over 84,000 students globally as well. So that's sort of our bricks and mortars agent network. We're really well established in a number of countries there. We also have a very large digital footprint as well. We have over 100 million visits across our connected websites. We have 40 connected websites. We have our IDP Live app that has 1.4 million downloads and growing. We also have the ambassador platform available on our websites as well. So another opportunity for institutions and students to connect sooner in their decision-making process. Always looking at ways to innovate. Yes, we are a big organization. We have a lot of touch points with institutions and students, but we want to make sure we're not just resting on our laurels. And a good opportunity or example of this would be our Fast Lane offer and principal services available here in Canada, where we can pre-vet and sort of increase conversion rates for institutions, provide a bit more trust in the process for our students as well. And again, we're always looking at ways to, speed up efficiencies or increase conversion rates as well. On the next slide, we're taking a look at how we partner with our strategic partners through our solutions. The first one being intelligence, so powered by real-time student data, cutting-edge analytics. So really allowing institutions to have access to data to help make evidence-based decisions, which we'll get into later in the panel discussion. We also do marketing services. So again, our app, our suite of translated and comprehensive websites, our TAP capability, our ambassador platform capability as well. So really connecting students and institutions sooner in the decision-making process. And then lastly, the recruitment side of partnerships as well. So our on-the-ground agent network supported by our technology, placing the student first and foremost in everything we do to make the right choice for the institution, program, location, finances, all of those things really coming at the forefront. On the next slide, we're looking at our data on a global scale. So we really do have full student funnel data. We have real-time student demand across 40 connected sites at the institutional and program level. We have IDP presence in over 35 countries. So the orange countries there are our source markets. The yellow countries are our destination markets. So we have experts in those fields, in those markets as well. Plus, we can take a look at application and enrollment data. So we can take a look at where students are searching for programs. Did that demand turn into applications and then ultimately enrollments as well? And then a lot of qualitative data and analysis that we have from our experts on the ground. So we just wanted to set the stage briefly as well. On the next slide, we just have a brief overview of the actual panel discussion. So again, actionable outcomes through data. Some of the themes we'll be looking at today would be the sources, so internal or external, historic and real time, the impact and importance of data, and then also measurable incomes as well. If you do have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A or chat function. We do have some pre-prepared questions that we're going to be going through. But if there's a question you want to pepper the panelists with, please feel free to do so. And I'm going to hand it over to the equally brilliant Ellie Butler.
Thanks so much, Prem. And yes, as Prem said, please feel free to enter questions in the Q&A box. We'd love to make this more interactive, get our audience involved. But we will begin with a very broad question for our panel. So let's talk about data sources. Can you talk about the various sources of data that you currently use in your role? And happy for either one of you to jump in first on that.
I'll jump in then. Yeah, so we internally we use some Power BI dashboards based on our internal information that's coming in. So we do admissions funnel conversion rates, year-over-year comparisons. I think a lot of people do this perhaps in other ways. We have retention rates when we can look at that by residency. We sometimes match our retention information with surveys, of course. We did a data mining project. So rather going in with a question, we just look where data kind of aligns in the last year to ask. And then we noticed where high school courses might be predictors of success or not. And is that different for international? And so those are some of the internal ones. External, really, when we turn into the recruitment phase, the IDP demand dashboards are kind of one of our key sources. They really were a game changer for us. We could use immigration information and market reports, but we were able to match up the great data we had internally with now looking at the front end and seeing that in real time rather than going backwards. So it's one of the big tools we certainly use.
Fantastic. A quick follow-up question to that. I'm interested to hear in your internal sources, you mentioned surveys. Are those surveys you're conducting of your own students, or what kind of surveys are you talking about?
Yeah, we have done some of our own, but we also kind of watch out. We have, the Canadian Bureau for International Education was going to come around with one, so we decided not to do one this year because you don't want to give your students fatigue. So we actually aligned. That was actually good too, though, because we could see where our competitors were at. We get some of that sector data as well. So sometimes on our own, but if we know something's coming around, we'll just use some third parties as well.
Yeah, definitely good to take advantage of that. Patrick, how about you and data sources?
Yeah, so externally, we use government reports and data, so IRCC, study permit data, ESDC, which is, I think, Employment Skills Development Canada. They have the NOC code system, which is used for qualifying students for immigration. So we use that data to map to our programs. We look at labor market data provincially, regionally sometimes, Global Affairs Canada, so Trade Commissioner reports. I call it International Ed News, so ISEF, the PI, IDP surveys that you guys put out, and the dashboards, Apply Board blogs. Geopolitical events are data rich, and looking at those and how do we leverage them. I mentioned regional and local demographic data from the city of Calgary or the province of Alberta. Provincial national associations, right? So we mentioned CBIE and CICAN for us. We also look at academic research and government reports on immigration, so especially relating to temporary residents to inform our programming. Internally, we do the usual, right? Lead capture data, conversion data, application conversion. We're a banner school, so we've integrated the data from banner into a number of Tableau reports on application conversion, demographics, retention, employment data. We also have a department at SAIT called Business Intelligence and Analytics, and they're the ones responsible for all of these dashboards, but they also run a number of surveys, just like Aaron mentioned. So we have a brand study that happens every year. So we benchmark against competitors, applicant experience surveys, no-show surveys, and grad employment surveys are the top off the top of my mind.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. And to tie your two answers together, Patrick, you mentioned geopolitical events and watching how they impact data. And it's fascinating, as you noted, Aaron, using IDP's demand dashboards, we can really see real-time changes in student interest and demand just based on those dashboards following a geopolitical event. So it's fascinating to see the impact that policy changes have, major elections on student demand. So very diverse, broad range of sources that you both are using, very impressive. Can you briefly tell us about the structure of your team and who manages and analyzes all of this data?
Patrick, I'll let you take the lead on that one.
Sure. I thought we were going to share a org structure, or do you want me to just, oh, there we go. So that's our team. That's the IC team at SAIT. We have a number of units. So the green unit is recruitment. And so most of those green individuals in the org chart are abroad. That's the global team. And then we have a partnerships team. So this is the team looking at, top of the funnel, conversion data, IDP data, Plyboard data, you name it, they're using it. And then if you shift over to the purple team, that's the business operations team. And so that we have a data person, information management specialist, and then we also have a marketing person in that unit, and then the rest of the admin team. And so they're collecting data, they're interpreting data. We have a risk study permit risk assessment that they run, and they help us make predictions about bums and seats. So that's the purple team. The blue team is the international admissions team, which is under our portfolio. And so they're looking at all those conversion data points, right? So convert to applicant, convert to offer, convert to LOA, and now we're converting to provincial attestation letters. And then the orange team is the support team. And so they're looking at all of those qualitative pieces. So what does pre-arrival look like? What data informs that? What do they most need pre-arrival? What do they need on arrival? We have some classroom readiness programs we've developed from the data to support them at orientation, and then all those transition programs. So accommodation surveys, are you working as a student surveys to help us understand their needs and design programming around that.
Amazing.
That's
so
it.
Really data is being used throughout this whole organization. One quick thing I want to note, I know we have a number of US institutions on the call, and Patrick mentioned LOA data. That is a letter of acceptance. We don't use that term in the US. So I wanted to provide a little context there for our Americans on the call. And Aaron, how about you and the structure of your team and kind of who manages and analyzes the data?
For sure. So we have a bit of a similar structure, as we have a data team at the institution that is separate from obviously the international staff. We are a smaller institution. So we've got an institution analysis and planning area that is lean but mean, and I consider them magical, frankly, half the time. But they are experts. There's I think about 4 people who do a lot of the analysis, and that's for the entire institution. And they take all internal data and feed it into a SEM model, strategic enrollment management model that they've built. Our MacEwan International staff, we've got 14 staff, but we handle both international students as well as partnerships and education abroad. So we're a bit smaller, but our international team, they certainly use dashboards. They can use both our internal and our third-party dashboards to see what's going on, where are we in the admission cycle and how we monitor retention and what we're doing there and where we see demand shifts. But then we just work very closely with the actual data team. That's what they do. They're great at it, right? So, rather than us trying to answer a lot of those questions, sometimes it's easy just to send it on. But yeah.
Definitely.
Excellent. I think important to take away to the use of data across institutions. I think sometimes when we chat with maybe just the recruitment team, they're like, well, I'm super busy, I don't have time for this data discussion or, to look at more data. But then I think spreading it out across the institution and really understanding the different touch points that data can be applied to and vice versa, I think is really, really important when you're kind of getting into those discussions as well.
Just
Question on
before
our,
dive in,
go ahead.
sorry, Prem, just
Yeah.
before you dive into your next question, we do have a question in the chat. Patrick, if you could remind us of your international enrollment. The question said that will be helpful when viewing your org chart. Sorry, you're on mute, Patrick.
Gosh, we're at over 7,000 international students at SAIT now.
Excellent. Thanks so much. All right, Prem, back to you.
Sure. So next set of questions we're looking at, what are some of the major challenges that your institution has faced that you sought to better understand with data?
Do you want me to go, Aaron? So I'll use a bit of a pandemic example. So I started March 16, 2020. So the next day I basically sent my team home. And when I started, we didn't have a lot of line of sight on predicting enrollments, and during the pandemic everything was disrupted, so we were desperately looking to collect data and then be able to make some reasonable predictions about how many students would seat how many bums in seats we would get, and this ripples through the organization, because if more show up or less show up, we need to either hire up or collapse sections. And so in the absence of a CRM, we created what I call the human CRM. So I think we hired about 15 students, and we created scripts for them to call all of our confirmed students and collect data kind of at a personal approach. And so that collection of data, as we learned and progressed, got a bit more sophisticated to a point where the way we've coded the data, now we're able to use that hitherto right now to make really good predictions about how many students are actually going to start. So, we have a historical prediction for students who don't answer our calls, right? Where they are in their study permit, for example. And so we've developed a whole system out of kind of the crisis and the desperation of trying to get the data. And so that was a really interesting project, because it's something we're going to use now with these new government restrictions in Canada. The other thing I'll mention, because we just didn't have a lot of data to work with, our journey, we actually, I mentioned this in another conversation, we did a data audit because we had all these questions and we didn't have good answers, or we didn't know where to find the data. So it's as simple as, book a boardroom, create some buckets of categories on a whiteboard. That's what we did. I think I had applicant prospect bucket, academic progression, and then careers and alumni. And I just had my team go in and write the questions they needed answers to do their work, really, on sticky notes. And so we did that for 3 days. We reconciled the questions, and then we worked on figuring out what was the right measure. And then we figured out, do we have a gap? Or is there a system or a survey that exists? And that was really helpful. We actually found a number of data sources that we're using now, and we're actually looking to fill some gaps as well. So I think that's something any institution can just easily do to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, I've learned that through our process as well, is don't go to the data people with answers, go to the data people with questions. I always get reminded of that. So, but I guess in the end, yeah, questions are a lot easier. Some of the major challenges that we've done, that we've used data to help better understand, we're often looking about the recruitment cycle, but one of the key things that we had a major challenge with was myth busting about the performance of international students. And I know Prem and I have talked about this, but I have this thing where a bunch of anecdotes does not constitute data, right? And so we actually were able to find some of that retention data and dispel myths that our international students are doing just as well retention wise as our domestic students, and sometimes better. And so I think that's really helpful within the institution. Some other challenges was, who are we competing against, right? We're kind of an interesting position within the Canadian education landscape. and so, who are our actual competitors? Who do we have to watch for? Some of our answers actually surprised us, to be honest with you, so that's okay too. What programs, student types, source countries have better conversion rates? We actually found that our conversion rates didn't exactly align with our national immigration conversion rate. So what does that tell us, right? We can't just use that. We need to use our own data as well. Where we were going to invest for diversification to still justify a return on investment. And one of the more recent ones is where are our branding and marketing gaps internationally? Where do we need to fill them? We're still kind of a bit on that journey.
Great, excellent. Sort of follow-up question to that is, how have you used data and insights to inform and involve your recruitment, marketing, could be admissions, conversion, and/or retention strategies? So Erin, you touched on retention, sort of myth busting earlier. Maybe a little bit more detail on terms of how the data really help to support and engage.
Sure, I can start with that. So, I think Patrick will probably speak to a lot of the pieces on the front end, but we really looked at sort of a nexus of data. I think that's really important, and starting with retention, right? I often also still like to look, when I think of recruitment, I'm thinking of the top of funnel through the process, right? But we really found that working backwards was really helpful in getting our numbers right, and I think that's serving us well right now in our new environment. But which programs did we actually need higher intakes for? Because we knew which programs had better retention rates. So we were able to narrow down. It's not just about where we have capacity or something like that, but really where do we need to make sure we're putting more seats at the front. So yeah, did all the data align with our admission conversions by program, by source country? Where do we put marketing pushes? And a lot of this flowed from retention, right? It is easier to keep students here than to go and find a new one. But through that process, that's really what built our SEM model. It actually has made us more confident in hitting our enrollment targets, because we don't just have to cast as big of a net and hope. So I think that some very much it was actually the retention piece that has really floated down, and knowing that made the recruitment data seeking we needed a lot easier. Yeah, and I'm sure that I'll let Patrick go. I'm sure that a lot of that front end part, so we're going to align a little bit with what Patrick's probably saying.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, we also are very interested to align retention with admissions, because you save a lot of effort by making those right decisions. I'll give a couple of examples. I'll give an admissions example. So when we restructured, when I kind of first started, we brought the admissions function under the International Center portfolio. And so I had to learn a lot of this on the fly. And so we used a lot of data to help us establish kind of the KPIs, the performance indicators. And we also did a lot of benchmarking against our competitors to understand what was the turnaround time on processing applications. And so our goal was to keep pace or surpass our competitors. We use data kind of towards the end of an intake to make more surgical decisions, right? So if we're starting to get to the last 10 or 15 offers, we'll probably look at what is the likelihood of conversion based on, historical program conversion, country conversion, IRCC processing data. So we'll take a bit of a scalpel towards the end and use data to help us with that. We also track data to help us shape the student experience as well. So I'll give you an example. This happened last term. We started to notice one of our most popular programs had a huge spike in Chinese applicants, and we were at risk of it being almost all Chinese, right? And so we immediately stopped that and reprioritized applications so that we would achieve a better diversity in the classroom. So there's kind of performance data, there's benchmarking data, and then there's kind of predictive data that we're using. The other thing, I'll mention, we brought on IDP Fastlane recently, and we're actually analyzing your data. We're actually checking to see how much of an impact Fastlane is having, and it's actually a higher conversion rate so far when we compare IDP applicants from just coming in through the normal route. So that's interesting. The other thing we're setting up is, I'm calling it an agent performance management framework. And so we're pulling data sources together into a Power BI dashboard to help us evaluate our agent partners in a much more meaningful way. So we want to track things like the usual suspects, right? Conversion rates, how many qualified versus unqualified applications they're sending us, program fit. Are they actually being counseled into the right program, or are they arriving and requesting a switch to a different program? GPA, we want to connect that to our partnership evaluation. I'd love to connect it to our graduate employment survey to really round it out. That's probably a much longer connection of the data sources. And how many are completing the training? Do they know how to work with SAIT? I think that's another measure, but we want to pull it all together, right? So that we can really evaluate that partnership. And sometimes we need to have difficult conversations and manage that performance, or sometimes we need to celebrate and reward that partnership. And so we don't really have an intelligent way to do that yet, because the data is all over the place, but we're working on pulling it together into a place where it's easy to pull up. We could even give a report card sort of thing, and it gives us some good action items in that partnership.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And the more we talk to clients, we hear that trend coming up pretty regularly. Like, we've got 1,000 agents, we really want to just get down to 100, or we've got 500, we only want 80. And so, like, where do you start in terms of weeding out? So a lot of it is like, well, we'll just look at how many students they sent us, but then, how maybe that's agent who sent you 10 students versus 100, all 10 of them, completed programs, graduated, now they work at the institution. So really interesting to track that sort of, to Aaron's point, the retention as well, and then linking that to the source where they came from, I think is really, really valuable. I think if you're doing sort of an ecosystem check, it's not just internally, but also externally, your partners, digital marketing, things like that as well.
Definitely. I love that idea of an agent report card. So love to see those in the future. So diving into our next question, we're going to talk about source markets a little bit. So how do you identify which key and emerging markets are best for investing in for your institution specifically?
I can go first, and it's not to sound like a broken record, but really we work backwards. We work from retention. We have a certain amount of capacity, physical capacity, but also our types of programming. So, we looked at retention, looking at things like which programs have better retention rates. So which programs do I need bigger intakes for, and then where are the markets that we can actually bring students in for those types of programs? Do we see program jumpers from certain areas of the world? I'm sure other institutions have this, right? They come into one and then they're moving. Okay, well, what does that tell us about the true program of choice? Or what are we doing in marketing, or is it perceptions of program expectations? So we look through conversions, all of that, and one of the biggest gaps that we had really strong internal data, but until we signed on with IDP Connect, it was really that lead data that we were really missing, right? And so, we've been a partner for a few years, but it was, we used to use big picture market reports. I'm sure everybody should, they tell you a lot, but they don't necessarily compare or tell you how they fit your institution. And because we're kind of we sit in a unique space within the Canadian post-secondary landscape, of kind of a crossover between college programming and universities, but no masters. And so how do all those things fit, right? Like, somebody can tell me the market is enormous, but if it's all grad students, well, that's not for me, right? And And so with the dashboards, it was a key piece of our puzzle, right? So we did work backwards and we found out where we needed to fit, but then we found what are the markets and is there even enough demand, right? It doesn't matter. I'm sure we all have deans or associate deans coming and saying, I need you to find me more students for program X, right? Well, is there any demand there for it? I mean, it's a hard conversation to have, but it's also a lot easier with data to show them, right? This is not just a team. They can go out and try their hardest to sell your program, sometimes it's program name, right? So it was really sort of that the IDP demand data was really one of those final pieces for us to flow backwards from it. And being able to nuance it for ourselves, where you can manipulate your filters and see where you're fitting in the space, and that we don't actually just need to look at Canada anymore. I felt like we were very much in a space where we were very insulated, right? We have a fine arts program, and if I were to just look at the Canadian landscape, that's not telling me much. I need to see where the data is flowing to all the other major destinations, and I think that's been a really good thing, because it's also been helpful in justifying then back to key markets and emerging markets. Where are we going? And I can stand up and say, here's all the data to prove it. This is not an anecdote, because I also, we have them all, have them. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong, but it's good when you can kind of back it up with data. So yeah, I think it's just about trying to break it down and then being able to have the front end data to figure out where your institution fits in that puzzle piece.
Sorry, I just wanted to add real quick too, I think, to the point where students are more engaged, they have more choices than ever before. They're really aware of what's going on. We see, as an example, demand for Canada going down towards Australia, UK, US. So institutionally, it's, well, how come our enrollments are down? Well, it's not anything that the recruitment and admissions teams are doing, it's global demand. So really understanding that, we're not in the Canada bubble. Sometimes we're very isolated. We only have the US to the south. But you look at the UK and APAC and other regions that are really aware of what's going on globally. So I think that has to really permeate throughout the institution, that, we're not in this bubble. Students have a lot of choices. Our surveys even mention, what is your first, second, third, fourth choice? What's the likelihood of you switching destinations? So they're considering that. So it's important to have that in terms of awareness at the institution as well. Sorry, Patrick.
Great point, Prem.
Yeah, thanks. It's interesting because about a year ago, our executive asked us to really focus on a diversity strategy to diversify our enrollment. So we, and full credit to our manager, Brian Scriver, who led this work. We kind of minted our diversity strategy last fall, got it approved. And we have a little bit of a methodology. There's just a number of considerations. So we'll look at what are the national, what's Canada's strategy? What are some of those key markets? What's Alberta's? See if there's any alignment there. Maybe there's some scholarships we can kind of take advantage of to enter that market. And so we have all the usual suspects, our main markets, and we've kind of divided it into emerging markets and frontier markets for us. And so an emerging market for us is where we've started to see growth. We forecast additional growth, and we don't need a high level of investment to continue to develop that market, because we've already established some awareness. So great example, we saw Chile come out of nowhere from like 2 enrollments a year to probably over 40 last year. So a very, very quick hockey stick kind of rapid increase. And so we have a regional representative in Colombia that's going to go and spend more time there. And it's not a massive investment. We're not going to need to do a ton of brand development. We're probably going to go and build out that network. So Chile is, for example, an emerging market. Frontier markets are ones that require higher level of investment, that are relatively low risk, but we still need to make a higher level of investment, focus on brand. And so, yeah, that's kind of our methodology. Something interesting we learned, it increases the the casting of the net, so to speak. So the areas that fall under this would be in Africa, Latam, Middle East, and Caribbean. What we've learned is the majority of the frontier markets are mostly non-English speaking countries. And we had a light bulb moment that we actually really need to double down on our ESL program, because that's going to be a stream or a pillar in how we create more diversity. And a lot of our students come from South Asia, where there's a lot of English being spoken, and Philippines and Nigeria. And so this is a great way to balance out, but we wouldn't have learned it if we hadn't really looked at it through language lens and other different lenses. So that's how we go about it. Lots of factors. Another one might be we do a lot of corporate training. We have a whole other department at SAIT, and so they're setting up corporate training in Kazakhstan or in Libya or all over the world. And sometimes there's a connection there, and we might leverage that connection as well.
Fantastic. And I think we've heard both of you speak about how important diversity is throughout this process. So it's wonderful to hear that it's been paying off for you as you invest more in these markets. I also was not familiar with the term hockey stick growth, but leave it to a Canadian to teach me that one. So thanks, Patrick.
I wrote that one down too. I was like, I'll ask Patrick later.
All right, so our next one is, can you give some examples of how you've used external data as a form of third-party validation when justifying strategy decisions to leadership? So Aaron, I know you touched on this one a little bit, using data to either justify a decision or maybe show why a market shouldn't be entered. But happy to hear from both of you about how you've used some data as third-party validation.
Yeah, I wanted to, for this one, I wanted to bring up my sometimes people think I'm crazy example. So it was actually in the middle of the pandemic, and it was one of our recruiters who had brought up the possibility of investing in Francophone Africa in our diversity market. And I will be honest with you, there were people at the institution who thought we were absolutely nuts, and I got the same eyes of going into Vietnam in 2012. So, but it was actually a lot of the IDP data that we used to try to say that there was a place. So, because we're not a huge branding school, we've had some success in the past of getting into markets, smaller markets early, right? I mean, that's great for diversification. It does take some investment, but why Francophone Africa? People said, why are we even going there? It should just be, the Francophone schools in Canada. There's no market for us there. But, we used some of the IDP data at that front end data. We were getting a trickle of students from Francophone Africa. As we used market reports, okay, there was some demand there, but then we sort of looked and we said, okay, Francophone, right into the IDP dashboard, Francophone Africa as a source market, and what was the demand share for Canada? Okay, there was decent demand, but we have a lot of really great Francophone institutions. So what were we actually seeing there? So then we actually looked to where else those students were seeking. So we've kind of flipped. Where else are they looking? And what you'll see is, yes, Canada ranked quite high, but all the other Anglo destinations were second, third, fourth before we actually saw France kick in on the list. And so what that actually told us was that it can't just be that there is a really large Francophone population and great schools where they can attend. There was actually demand. So we dug deeper through market reports. We talked to people at the institution who came from some of those countries, kind of did a little bit of a deeper dive, and we really found that if you are younger than 30 or 40 years old in a lot of Francophone African countries, you got English education, right? And so there wasn't that language gap, and that they were seeking that. So the older generation might have been French speakers. The younger will be too, right? But Canada also has benefits for those who speak both of our official languages, right? So in the immigration world. So there was a market for us. Yes, it wasn't enormous. This is not like walking into China or Vietnam or India, right? But if we're thinking about diversification, at the very least, it did take third-party data for me to justify that I was not absolutely crazy in investing in Francophone Africa. And the payoff was when we went to fairs, both virtually and then in person, we were one of the very few Anglo institutions in that room, which meant that we actually got the majority of students who were looking for Anglo institutions, right? So it was just, yeah, so there was a data justification. I'm very glad it paid off, and I'm very happy I had the data to back me up. But it was one really interesting way that, yeah, we could use it to justify where are we going to invest, because, you know, we're a public institution as well. We have to be careful with that. So, yeah.
That's a great point. Like, I love the testing your assumptions and saying, well,
Yeah.
you know, X always doesn't equal Y. And so that's a great example.
Yeah, so I can give an example. So I started, like I said, March 16, 2020. I'll never forget it. And shortly after starting, our executive asked us to create a 5-year growth plan. We called it the Big Bold Strategy, and it's basically the strategy to get us to the 7,000 that we are at today. And there was a number of pillars that we told our executive we needed to stand up to get it. One was the global recruitment team that we created, bringing admissions over, getting a advanced admission system. But the other one was around the portfolio of the programs we were offering, and how did we stack up with the competition. And we knew that we needed a really competitive portfolio of programs that were attractive to international students to realize this really bold vision in the strategy. And so we worked with IDP, we worked with UPrem, and we tasked you to do the research, do some benchmarking, some competitor benchmarking for us, and tell us what were, I think it was the top 15 or 20 programs across Canada in our lane of program offerings vis-a-vis our competitors. I think it was 10 or 12. And it was interesting because we learned that we were kind of at the bottom of the search demand across our competitors. That was really good learning for us. And we also realized when we saw the programs that came up that we actually had a number of those programs already, but we weren't offering them because we hadn't structured them to be attractive to international students. So they were, less than 8 months or not long enough, or, and some of them needed new names because they didn't kind of click in the market as well as they should. They didn't resonate. So we were able to activate, I think it was either 6 or 8 existing programs or curriculum very quickly into programs that we offered, and they all filled really quickly, and we scaled a lot of them as well. And then the ones that we didn't have, I think we were able to develop either 4 or 6. Some of them are still going to the ministry for approval here in Alberta, but those have been very successful as well. And the data was really helpful for me because it wasn't, I sit down with the deans and we talk about these things, and it's not Patrick saying, this is what I'm hearing, this is what I think. It's here's some actual demand data. And that helps when we go to, we call it investment committee here at SAIT when we're proposing new programs. So that's been really great. We knew that we couldn't just rely on IDP. It's a great data source, but the more the better. So since then, we've kind of enhanced that process. So we're using other data sources. So we take some of ApplyBoard's data as well. We take agent data. So we actually have set up, I think it's twice a year, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. We actually email a survey to all of our agents, asking them about these new programs that we're thinking about for feedback. So demand, do you think it should have a co-op? What's the best delivery mode? So we ask a number of those questions, and we reward our agents for giving us responses. So that's how we collect that data. We also get our global recruitment team that's all over the world to respond to those because they're hearing what students are asking for as well. The other thing we are using as well is as a service called Lightcast. It used to be called Burning Glass. So that's labor market data in our catchment area here in Alberta. And so that's a kind of a second step validation to make sure we're creating a program that will have that labor market demand. And then I'll give another example. Sometimes there's just no data, right? And so we're partnering with a peer institution in Ontario right now to co-develop a program that's very novel. It's very, very novel. We've heard from some industry folks saying that we really think it's a great program, but we don't have any IDP data. You know what I'm saying? So it's or other sources of data because it's so novel. And so we're looking for new sources of data to give us some level of validation. And the reason we're partnering with that peer is to bring down the risk and the cost of that experiment. So it's interesting. Sometimes you're not going to have that data and you're going to need to find some other sources that serve as a proxy to help you make that decision.
Absolutely. I think,
Go ahead,
sorry, I was going to mention too, I think, we've done projects with both State and MacEwan, and I think we're one piece in the big cog of the machine of the institution. So not the be all end all, but really, I think that's a great point in terms of like, you're doing a research paper, you need to have multiple sources, not just one. You have to have really solid data. And also, looking at the opportunities that don't exist, could we be the first program in, X, Y, and Z? So yeah, I really appreciate the comments there. We do have about 10 minutes left. We did have a question in the Q&A. It does tie to our next question. So I'll do our next question. I think we captured it there. Just for our US audience and those in Canada maybe living under a rock who haven't heard about the federal announcements in January 2024, there was an international cap on international students. The process is to be administered by a provincial government through provincial attestation letters. To anyone, if you hear us say PALs, it's just a nice, easy way to say that, PAL. So the study permits are sort of being distributed through the PALs and sort of a way of tracking. So the question that we have from the audience also came that, how have the recent policy announcements impact how you will manage admissions processes moving forward? And then also looking at maintaining diversity as well, instead of just rushing for volume. So I'll hand it over to both Aaron and Pat.
I can head off first. I mean, when I start talking about where you don't have data, this is a brave new world, I think, for all of us. And I think we've got some data to inform things, and I think we need to use whatever we have. I think we started off at our institution just recognizing that as much as we can rely on our data, behavior is going to be a factor that we can't necessarily account for because we haven't been in this environment previously, right? And we still don't have all of the details. So we're going to use the best data we have. We're going to be cautious. We're going to have to monitor that data. With that, we have asked the question, where can we maximize our provincial attestation letters, the PALs that students need to get that? I think also just perhaps even for the Canadian audience, I can just say Alberta did not land where all the predictors said we were going to land. We got significantly fewer, and yes, it's not the same as the massive reductions in some other provinces, but it did change, I think, the path that a lot of Albertan institutions were on. So, and that kind of it did come out later in the process, so we had to kind of deal with that from what we were, the numbers that were thrown around in the beginning. So we have had to look at where we can maximize PALs. I know a lot of institutions are saying, okay, we're not going to give those, the tickets, the golden ticket, until you've confirmed and dedicated yourself to an institution. I think that's fairly standard. We did have questions about, are we going to look at IRCC study permit approval rates? I'm very happy that our institution has said, no, we are not going to look at that. We're committed to diversification, but I can also understand where institutions really need to use that data to make those choices, right? Every institution is different. And so, but I've also mentioned before, our approval rates didn't always match what IRCC's approvals rates were by country. So sometimes finding out, if you do have to go down that road, confirm, do those actually match, and can you make those decisions for your institution? How is it nuanced to you? But we have been looking into our data to say, where are our conversion rates on programs not that good. And I think that we do have some very small programs where conversion rate to arrival is pretty low, and we won't take them all away from those programs, but we are still going to have to make some of those decisions on, do we shift more of them to some other programs that are more likely to have the student arrive? What does that mean in our market? It could be because we have so many competitors, right? We know speed to offer. That's our prediction, is going to be even more important now. And so what does that mean? We're going to make human resourcing choices. How do we shift human resources within the institution to try to get there? There are other mechanisms out there, but we're going to have to make those decisions. And then what happens when we stop admissions really early in the summer on international, right? Because we're just trying to speed them up in the beginning. So we've also had to look at some programs. As much as they want them to fill, they have so many different steps in the process, portfolios, auditions, and just having it slow down so much. We predict that if a student, given the volatility in the landscape right now, if we don't get those offers out and confirmed faster than everybody else, we can't say that because the behavioral change in this volatile market that we're going to keep them. So I think that this is going to be absolutely critical, which is where we've had to use the data to say, where are we stalling in our admission cycle, and where do we need to reallocate human resources and justify why we're doing those things. So, we're going to more closely monitor agent performance. Patrick's mentioned that. And then we're going to have to take a big data dump out of this year that we're going into, and take a look at what happened and see what we're going to do in the future.
Yeah, no, those are some great points. It's such a multi-dimensional challenge for us to solve, and we're having similar conversations here. We've set some kind of criteria for prioritization, even just what programs to prioritize. Like Aaron said, there's some that convert better than others. Sometimes we have maybe there's a very strong labor market need for that program, so maybe it gets prioritized. Maybe we have a government mandate to support an industry. So there's a number of those factors on product, and then there's considerations for selection of applicants to get the best outcome, and we're absolutely looking at those. It's a really challenging nut to crack, let me tell you, because we don't want to get caught in the or be seduced by just catering to what IRCC looks at for the study permit, because if we do that, we're not going to achieve our larger, more strategic objectives, if I can put it that way. And so, yes, we need to adjust those dials to optimize for it, but then you need to account for how that impacts your diversity. And so we're introducing some of these adjustments to quality assure and use variables that serve as proxies for conversion, even in markets that convert harder, right? So we're doing some of that internally. We're also introducing a service some folks are using. It's called Border Pass. And so we hope that that's really going to support the visa conversion in those markets where approvals are lower. So that's another mitigation strategy, but we're going to need to kind of test it as we go without shooting ourselves in the foot, but still trying to achieve those objectives. There's lots of proxies for conversion, and sometimes we just focus on the tiny ones that may not impact that entire student journey. And so, there's human capital variables we want to assess as well, right? I would even argue, does the student have a family member in Calgary? That's a really strong conversion indicator. It tells me they might have a place to stay. We have a housing crisis in Canada, and they have a support network. So these are the kinds of things I'm looking at that don't always fit into IRCC's lexicon, right? So I caution folks from just going, we have to just fit into this little study permit approval box. Yes. And I would also encourage folks to think beyond these 2-year, hiatus. We have to ask ourselves, why are we here? Because there's the checks and balances, the quality assurance across Canada was challenged, and IRCC is working for the next 2 years to put the right quality assurance in place. So what are you doing now to prepare for that? So there's going to be an IRCC, I think it's called Recognized DLI framework. What are you doing now to comply and align with that and be on that list? I think you need to spend some time on that now. We're spending quite a bit of time on that because we want to be ready for it, and we want to align with that national mandate of creating a great student experience, right, and serving industry. So I'll leave you with that one. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Patrick. We are past time. So
I believe we are, yes. So apologies that we won't be able to get to the remainder of the questions in the chat box, but fascinating conversation. So thank you so much, both Aaron and Patrick, for joining us, and Prem for being my co-host on this session. This webinar was recorded, and the recording will be shared with all of you in a follow-up email. Take care, and we will see you next time. Thanks all.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you.